Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for today's episode of Real Estate Disruptors. Today we have Byron Iregbu with Wonder US Property Group. Brian's going to share how his team did 90 deals during COVID, including 1 week where he did 6 figures, working only 20 hours per week. Crazy, crazy numbers. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm Steve Trang, sales trainer for some of the top wholesalers in the country, and I'm on a mission to create 100 millionaires. One question I get a lot is, how do I become one of the 100 millionaires? The information on this podcast alone is enough to help you become a millionaire in the next 5 to 7 years. Take consistent action and you will become one. When you hear a nugget, type it in the comment section. After the show, identify your single biggest takeaway and focus on just that for the next 7 days. If you get value today, please tag your friend below or share this episode right now. That way we can all grow together. And don't forget, this is a live show, so please ask your questions for Brian to answer. You ready?
Man, I'm ready, Steve.
All right, cool. So, what got you into real estate?
What got me into real estate? So, first things first, I actually didn't come from an entrepreneur background. I actually came from the mantra, go to college, get a good job. Life would be great, they said. And if you want life to be even better, get more degrees.
Yeah.
So, I actually came out of college and I actually started teaching. I was a high school science teacher for 4 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Taught high school science for 4 years. And after that, I actually got, it was stressful. I actually liked it, but I just wanted more money and really something a little bit more fulfilling. So I actually got into the oil and gas industry. And I was working shift work, 50 to 70 hours a week, night shifts and day shifts. And on the night shifts, my coworkers were about 25 years older than me. They would go to sleep and everything. And I would hear them say, Bob, in another 7 years, I'll retire and I'll be able to go fishing or go camping. And it just didn't really sit well with me. So while they were sleeping, I would be on the internet trying to find out ways to make more money. A lot of things seemed gimmicky or scammy, but I kept coming back to real estate. And I was like, man, I think this is real. There's too many examples. So that's what got me into it. I actually told my wife, it's my fiance at the time. I said, I want to try this. At the time, I didn't really have much money. I didn't really have great credit. She supported. We went on our honeymoon to Bahamas. As soon as we came back, I invested, a large, little portion of what I had into some education, and the rest is history. So,
which education got you started?
So it was like a freedom, some sort of freedom course, and also I had a guy locally that was doing some deals, and he allowed me to kind of split profit on, really I was kind of like a bird dog, right? And he tossed me a couple coins.
But you got to start.
Yeah.
So one thing that I heard you say just a moment ago, high school science teacher.
Yeah.
So you went to school to become a teacher?
Yeah, I had a biology major, chemistry minor. Yeah.
And I asked that question because I actually, in my mind, was thinking I want to be a school teacher, and I saw how much teachers made, and I said, all right, that's not happening. But I also said, like, when I retire one day, I think I want to go back to be like a science teacher in high school. So that was actually what was in my mind. But now I get to teach and make money doing it. But
yeah.
It's cool to hear that because that's what I wanted to do initially. Now, you went to go work for this oil and gas company,
right,
and then you went also did the side hustle thing. Mm-hmm. And I actually wrote that down to talk about later on, so we're going to talk about side hustle. But the other thing is you found someone to mentor you, and you gave them a percentage of the profits.
Right.
Was it 50-50?
It was 50-50. That very the first deal, it wasn't actually my deal. I wasn't solo. That actually was just kind of like a little fee.
Mm-hmm.
So I just got paid a little fee. But the actual deals that I was like really a part of,
mm-hmm,
and it wasn't just handing over a lead. Yeah, it was 50-50.
And I asked this question because a lot of guys are like, how do I get started? I don't have money and this and that. And I say this, and I don't think anyone cares for the answer, but I say, like, there's nothing wrong with working for somebody.
Bro.
And learning.
Biggest cheat code ever.
Yeah, learning from their experience. Yeah, you don't make as much money per deal, but you save so much time, money, and energy, and how not to screw up.
Right. I'm proud. Some gurus are gonna get mad at me, right? Course sales. Everybody's course sales is probably gonna go down, but I think one of the biggest cheat codes is somebody that's new. Say, how do I get started? I see everybody posting all these checks on Facebook. Go get a great deal Bring it to somebody that is proven and are actually doing deals, and split the profit, because you can invest thousands of dollars into somebody's mentorship course and still not have their phone number.
Right.
Now, a lot of these, real estate investors, yes, you might say, I got a deal, and they might, toss it in their system. Hey, call this person. It's my blank manager, right? But a lot of them, they'll actually help you work that deal. Now you have the personal contact to that person, and you actually have like one-on-one mentorship off the record, right?
Right.
So that's like a cheat code for somebody to.
So I love that you did it.
Yeah.
And you still believe in that model.
That model is gold.
I love it. All right, so let's talk about your very first deal. What was your very first deal?
Bro, so this was 2014. It was, the lead actually came from a company called ZBuyer. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
I have.
But they actually was like a subscription-based service that sold PPC leads at the time. The leads aren't the same anymore. I think they do email marketing now. But they were selling PPC leads. So these was really great leads. And so I found the guy. His name was Will Hancock. I remember it to this day. And I called him. I did my little, my little formula, and I actually offered him $100,000. I said, I didn't know what this. Hey, I'll give you $100,000 cash. And guess what? The scariest thing happened. He accepted it.
Right.
I was like, where am I going to get $100,000 from? I remember at the time I was in an apartment. I was pacing back and forth. My palms were sweating and everything like that. But that was my, so that was the first offer. He accepted it. And so when I first started, I learned more advanced creative techniques. So I didn't do the normal go find a cash buyer. I actually tried to dispo the deal through the MLS to get a maximum spread. So I went to a realtor, Keller Williams at the time, and I said, hey, I got this contract and I want to go ahead and put it on the market so I can find a buyer. She said, you can't do that. You're not on title. And I said, yeah, you can. My coach said I can. And she said, wait up. Let me call, my escrow agent. Escrow agent came down to the office, sat beside me, looked at my contract, said, yeah, he told the realtor, yeah, he can do that. Put it on the market. It took about, the buyer was like a FHA buyer, so it took about 3-4 months. And of course, the buyer had to go under contract with my actual seller, right? Because they were getting a loan. The guy gave me a few extensions. When it came to closing, Steve, I went to the closing table to pick up my check, and the escrow officer said, who are you? And I said, well, I'm the guy that, the wholesaler that did the deal. They said, well, you're not on the HUD.
Right.
Because I was cut out the transaction. I didn't do everything right. So the guy, just admiring the hustle, he actually cut me a check in the title company's lobby for $4,800 and gave it to me.
Who cut you the check?
The seller.
The seller cut you.
So he just respected the hustle. He basically told me what I was going to make. He said, you said you was going to close on this day. You didn't close. Then it was another month, and it was another month. I think $4,800. And he cut me a check for $4,800.
That's awesome.
And that was my first deal.
That's good, because that could have been a really expensive lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And that's something like, we talk about novations, right? Like substituting and this and that. But you just went ahead and did a contract between the buyer and the seller.
Yeah, no paperwork.
No one owed you anything.
Nothing.
Right? At least legally, no one owed you anything.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm glad that you got paid on that one. So that was back in 2014?
2014, yeah.
Okay, because I still remember, before I met you, there was a great video of you getting blasted by Max and Scott.
By quitting my job?
Yeah, you want to talk about that?
Absolutely, man. I love those guys, man, and I like where they was coming from. But yeah, so that was We Live right before We Live 19 in Dallas, and we were just kind of hanging out, and it was putting the pressure on me because at this time I did have the 6-figure job. I was working at ExxonMobil, Fortune 3 company, making about anywhere from $115 to $120 on my W-2. And I was by myself with just like a VA, and I was making about $105 on the side. So I was making a little bit over $200,000 as a solopreneur, right? And it was like, yo, if you're doing this much, right, working part-time, then this job that you're working 50 to 70 hours a week, why not go full-time? And
you're working 50, 70 hours a week?
Yeah, it was shift work. We worked 12-hour shifts.
Okay. Wow.
It was a great job, though. Yeah. But anyway, and my philosophy, the reason, it was two things. One was a little bit of fear, but another is I just had a different plan. I read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I was really big on the passive income thing. And so I didn't want to leave my job until I had enough rentals to take care of all of my expenses.
So you had a plan.
I had a plan. I didn't, and I was actually kind of bitter a little bit towards the wholesaling and kind of how realtors feel. I kind of felt like, man, I'm buying rentals creatively, right? Yeah. And because I didn't want to go wholesaling and just be a job. What I wanted to do when I left my job, I had the luxury of doing a deal if I wanted to do a deal, and if I didn't want to do a deal, I don't have to do any more deals.
Yeah.
So that was the conversation. They were pushing me to leave. I knew that I wasn't ready yet because if I left then, I still had to do deals, and I just wanted the rentals to be able. So I stayed a little bit longer until I reached that goal.
So you still stuck to your vision.
My vision, yeah.
Which is powerful because you got two monsters
crushing
it.
Right, that I respect and admire, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Telling you to go change directions or pivot, and you're like, nah, I got my vision. I'm going to execute my vision.
I'm so glad, Steve, that I did it that way.
Yeah.
Because what I find is a lot of people do it the opposite way. They build a big wholesale operation that's generating 6 figures plus, but because of payroll, because of marketing expenses, it doesn't make sense for them to take down a rental and get a few $100 a month when they could get a $10,000-$15,000 check. Yeah. You kind of get stuck in that.
Right.
And, so I went my route originally kind of for fear and safety, but it worked out in my favor.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what were some of your early struggles? I mean, we talked about this deal where you could have been completely screwed.
Right.
What were some other early struggles?
Man, stopping marketing. And it took me so long before I realized what the problem was, right? But stopping marketing, maybe if I'm feeling a little low, on funds, I would just kind of slow up on marketing, right? And then it'd just be kind of like a ghost town, right? Tumbleweeds with the pipeline, and I never really put two and two together. But later on, it's one of
those things that's really obvious when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it's not in your face.
I think Henry Ford has a quote that says the person that stops advertising to save money is like taking the battery out of a watch to stop time, right? And so that was my earliest struggle, man. Just stopping marketing and wondering why I'm not doing deals.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you came to your own realization. Someone helped you out.
I kind of came to my own realization, and what I would do, I would just keep a steady stream, kind of like a drip. I wouldn't cut it off completely. So that's what I started to do. And of course, when I met my partner, then I really got it because he's an integrator. He's a numbers guy, and he really introduced me heavy into KPIs.
Gotcha.
And then when I started looking at KPIs, then it got exciting. It was like, oh well, you could kind of forecast everything with like a crystal ball.
Exactly.
When you see the numbers.
Exactly. And so we met at We Live 19. So that was fun. And it was kind of funny because even back then I was like, dude, when are you going to come on the show? You're like, I don't deserve it. And you're still acting kind of like, I'm no big deal. It's like, but you're making 6 figures a year part-time.
Yeah. So, and that's crazy. And I think that's one of those biggest things, like judging success based on the comparison thing, judging success on what you see. And I felt like 6 figures a year part-time. At first I felt confident about it because in my little market, that was a big deal. But then when I started to see, look that, I'm not the only one crushing it. Because where I was, I was that guy, right? But then I started, meeting other people. I was like, oh, man, everybody's doing 6 figures a month. That's the new standard, right? And so I was just kind of waiting till I, hit that 6 figures.
Well, I think maybe that humility is maybe what.
Maybe so,
is what attracts people to you. So I went on I would say a rant. But I made some strong statements about anti-side hustle.
Anti-side hustle.
Right.
Okay.
Because everyone's talking about it, at least on social media, right? Side hustle, right? You got to do your side hustle. Whether it's flipping cars or, drop shipping or whatever it is. It's always like the side hustle. And I hate the term side hustle because it implies that you're doing it part-time.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like a full-time gig. Like side hustle to me is like 5-10 hours a week. Like, if you're going to give yourself a shot, you got to be doing 20 hours a week. Like, you're not doing anything fun, right? Any leftover time has got to be towards your other business so that you can quit your existing job. Anything you want to add to that? Well, I guess how many hours were you working when you're trying to quit your job? On your side hustle.
You know, that's funny because people call it, they say, man, you're a part-time, so you're a part-time real estate investor. But in my eyes, I'm like, man, I'm full-time at both. Because I felt like I was, at that time, I was investing, like you said, everything I had left. So it really didn't feel like part-time. But at that time, I'm going to tell you exactly what I used to do, Steve. I used to work, I used to go to work with the Exxon Mobil uniform on, right? Work a 12-hour shift. I would leave out of the gate and I would go direct. I would line up my appointments, right? And I would leave out of the gate from work and go directly to at least 2 seller appointments. I would have my boots on and everything, and I would meet people. I wouldn't have a We Buy Houses shirt. I would have an Exxon uniform on. The crazy thing about it, it worked in my advantage.
Yeah.
People put their guards down. He was a normal working guy. And I just felt like, is this a cheat code, right?
Yeah.
Just being a normal guy. So what I would do is I would do that, and then my wife would get the last couple of hours, and she understood the vision. And I did that until reached that goal. So that's how I kind of approached it.
So how many hours a week do you think you were putting in?
At that time?
In real estate career?
In real estate, probably about 30 hours a week.
Yeah.
Because I was going to appointments. I was the one calling, right? Doing dispo, doing all of that.
And so everyone that's listening that's got a job, that's trying to figure out how to exit it, I just want to impart how important it is. It's not just like, don't look at this as a side hustle, because side hustle is, in my mind, 5-10 hours a week.
Yeah.
Like, you got to look at this like it's another baby. Yeah. You got to be treating it, all your extra time and energy's got to be going towards that if you're going to ever exit your W-2 job.
Basically, if you're looking to replace it, you need to be almost trying to work many hours a week on that as you work on your job, as actually physically possible. It's only 24 hours in a day, but give it all you got until, your brain has to cut off or your eyes have to shut.
Yeah, basically until it turns off.
I did.
For sure. One thing I want to say, when we were in Dallas or We Live, you lied to me. You told me.
What'd I tell you?
Whataburger's the best burger. And you're like, you gotta go. And I went there at 3 a.m. It was not the best burger I ever had. I don't know if we want to talk about it here. What you want to do?
What type of burger did you have, Steve? You didn't have the right burger, man.
I don't know. It was some breakfast thing. I don't know.
See, yeah, you remember? And I told you, I said, man, it's not known for breakfast. It's known for the burger. It
was 3 a.m. in the morning. What else am I going to eat?
A double cheeseburger, man.
Man, I didn't know. You weren't there. You weren't there to support me. I went there with somebody else, and it was not the best burger I ever had. You promised me it was going to be the best. It wasn't.
Next time you come to Texas, man, I'm going to point you to the right thing on the menu.
All right, I appreciate that. All right, so you mentioned you partnered up with Byron.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about that evolution, because you already had a business.
Yeah.
And Byron already had a business.
Right.
Why did you guys partner up?
Oh, man. I love this question. So, it's funny. Keith Everett, right? Real good friend of mine. We actually, I think it was 2019. We actually went to, me and a couple other guys, Armani, his partner in Dallas. We actually went to Alabama just to kick it. It was really just to hang out, right? In Alabama. And while we were there, we kind of talked about, some systems and things like that. And, I kind of had a little chip on my shoulder, kind of like, some realtors do, right? Mm-hmm. About wholesaling, right? Not that I felt like I was bigger than it, but I was just kind of like, now that I left my job, or I'm leaving my job, like as soon as I leave my job, I'm not really into that. And I voiced that to Keith, how I felt about the wholesaling part, right? Mm-hmm. And Keith was like, bro, it sounds like you just need a partner. Man, he said, man, it's like you just need a partner. You just need that integrator. And I was like,
I mean, that's the head motion he would make.
Yeah, and I said, but who? And he said, man, and he threw out a couple names. And the first one, I was like, no, he's in a different state. And then he actually tossed out Byron, because, I was like, I never thought about that, right? And he broke it down as far as what Lenny brings to him, and because a lot of people see one side of the business, but they don't know. People know the Warren Buffetts, but they don't know the Charlie Mungers, right? Mm-hmm. And so I thought about it, and a light bulb went off. I went back to Texas, and I reached out to Byron, because we would talk, and it's crazy because he would tell me his struggles in his business, and he would ask me questions, and I would give him advice, but And I'm just thinking like, why is he stressing out trying to build this wholesale operation? I'm just like, man, just buy more rentals, creatively, right? And when I came back, I actually proposed it to him. He was down for the idea. And man, it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah.
Because Byron is really good on the systems, the numbers, the leadership, like that side of the business. And so it was just kind of like a perfect, I needed an integrator.
Yeah.
And when we put those two together, man, it's just, I couldn't wait. He was like, hey, man, checking hers. I'm like, man, let me send them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when everything really started to kind of take off when Byron came aboard. So that was the reason for the partnership. And then it really kind of made me feel a lot better about, continuing to build like a wholesale operation.
When was this?
We partnered, it's been about a little over 2 years now.
I'm wondering, I remember there was a post, I think Keith made it. I think it was about you. And I'm wondering if that was the post, like we had like a talk or something.
I don't know.
It was a while back. Anyway.
Good decision, though.
So Byron wasn't even with you. It was just...
Yeah, it was just me going hang out. It wasn't a mastermind. We were just going just kick it, because a lot of times you get real close with people over the internet, but you don't know them personally, right? And that's what we were just going kick it in Alabama. And of course, real estate came up. We talking real estate.
Of course, real estate comes up.
I had a few bitter words about like the wholesale. I'm like, it's cool, but I mean, I'm just wholesaling, so just so I could get a lead to give them multiple offers, just so I could get the property long term, right?
Yep.
And yeah, he gave me that advice, and that was really good advice.
So you said took off. So what were you doing, and what have you done since?
Right. So around then, man, I got to the point where I was probably averaging about $20,000 to maybe $20,000 to $30,000 a month. Often sometimes I would have months where I do $10,000. Every once in a while I have a month where I don't do any deals, right? But still had the rentals, the foundation. So when me and Byron got together, I'm not sure how long it took, but I know our first six-figure month was February of 2020. We did 124.6. July of 2020 did about 130,000 in a week. I forgot the week, but it was in July. And matter of fact, I made a YouTube video and kind of posted all the receipts and stuff. So that's the difference, 20 to 30,000 by myself. Had a six-figure week. I thought that was impressive.
Oh no, that's huge. That's a huge jump. One thing I think we talked about this before was that you've got this big social media following. You've got this brand. But you were like, how do I think we were talking about maybe like being continuous or being consistent with it.
Yeah.
Because you feel like, I don't know.
Lost touch.
Yeah, you just don't feel like posting content all the time
right.
is what you need to do. And I think I was telling you, like, no, that's exactly what you need to do because there are other people with jobs. They're trying to quit their jobs.
Yeah. And that was some great advice, man. I really appreciate you, Steve. Yeah. I mean, because you kind of caught me at a point where I was having this, I don't know what you call it, but like identity crisis. Because when I quit my job, it's kind of, man, that's the biggest goal. But the following was built because I was kind of doing the Gary Vee thing, but by accident, right? I would be in my uniform and I would be going on seller appointments and I would videotape me shaking the seller's hand, and then 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, they would see me cashing the check. And it was all just me being like transparent and open. And a lot of people, you know, they look at this, they see all the checks, but they like, man, but how? And I was taking people in seller appointments with me. And I really kind of feel like I pioneered that, you know, because it was way back in 18.
Yeah.
And that's what had all of the, the engagement going crazy and everything. But once I quit my job, Steve, that was my goal. But once I quit my job and I got a team, I'm at home most of the day with my wife. And so I kind of felt bad about posting content because I'm like, I'm not doing all that anymore. But I am. The company is, so I couldn't, it was hard to make the switch. Like, do I just make a video from my house, in my room, my office, or my kitchen? So I'm glad that you kind of pointed that out. I still haven't really got there. It doesn't feel comfortable as it did, you know?
Yeah. Just
pulling out my phone and just showing you what I'm doing because I'm in it.
Yeah, I know. But still, I go back and arguing that it's showing what's possible, right? Like, when people are taking pictures of checks, they're showing what's possible if you hustle, if you wholesale. and we're showing like it's possible to quit your job if you chase this, right? So it's just kind of showing what's possible. And then we had some technical difficulties at the beginning of the show, and while the mic was off, we were talking about like favorite episodes.
Yeah.
And you asked me, and I shared with you like one of my favorite episodes. My favorite episode is Heim, right? And I said, and you asked me why of all of them. We've done so many, like why Heim? And I said because Heim's the only one that started for time and financial freedom, and still is doing this business for time and financial freedom. Because we get caught in the comparison contest.
Mm-hmm.
I got to beat this guy, I got to beat that guy. Like, how many did you do last month? All right. And so, you want to talk about that? Like, what your thoughts were on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was kind of a little guilt trip I had as well, because my whole goal was because when I was working 50 to 70 hours a week. Exceptional company. However, I shift work, and it's almost like a hospital where there is no off days, right? Mm-hmm. If you're on the schedule for Christmas, you work on Christmas. Thanksgiving, you work on Thanksgiving.
Really?
Oh yeah, that's how it was, right? But it's kind of like, I'm working for one of the top 3 companies in the world, right? Mm-hmm. Since the last 10 decades, right? I mean, the last decade, right? So what happened was I was getting to the point where, man, I would miss Thanksgivings, Christmases. They would have wedding receptions where my wife would be dressed up and go alone, and it would say, "Where's Brian? He's at work, right? He's working nights tonight, right?" All type of event, baby showers, and that was one of the when it really turned up the conviction in me to like really replace a job. But what I wanted to do, like you said, is I just wanted the freedom. And now I kind of, like you said, kind of like Heim, I kind of got what I want, mm-hmm. right? And so I kind of you're right, I kind of throttle it. So I don't work 40 plus hours a week. I wouldn't say we're still building and growing, but yeah. So I mean, I think it's whatever you want,
Well, I think, and that's the last part, right? It was whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so, like, remember why you started, time freedom, financial freedom, mm-hmm. whatever, is that, we all get caught in this comparison game, and we forget what we wanted.
Steve, I think that we get brainwashed by someone else's views of success. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you can reflect and think about the times you feel the most joy, not pleasure, joy. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between love and lust, right? Mm-hmm. Joy, that real joy, that's success.
Yeah.
Try to get more of that.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's a great point, though. I think everyone needs to remember that. So, what's your business looking like today?
I think it's about 11 of us. Have a dispositions manager, have 2 acquisition managers, 8 cold callers. We also have an admin. She basically handles everything like payroll and all that stuff. And also she does all the data pulling and everything like that. And then we have like we call it our data analyst. He basically handles the integration between Podio and Power BI and all of our metrics. And then Byron and myself. So
Power BI?
Yeah, Power BI is Microsoft. It's kind of like you ever heard of Plecto? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like Plecto. However, it doesn't have a fancy UI. It's like you could build it however you want. Mm. It's like a Podio version of Plecto.
Got it. Yeah. Cool. So what was that like when you guys married, right? Like you and Byron, like you had a business, he had a business, mm-hmm. and you guys merged it. For those people that are thinking about partnering up, what was that process like?
Perfect question. So as far as on my end, it was just me and 2 lead managers, right? Mm-hmm. My mother was part of my business. She's a hustler. She's crazy. She's actually TC, transaction coordinator. She's really good at it. But then I had another lead manager. So that's all that I had. And I came over. Of course, I have my personal rentals. But that's all I had. So when we partnered, I brought them 2 over, mm-hmm. and connected with what he already had, and I think he probably had like 5 people on the team at that time, 4 or 5, right? As far as the legality, we went ahead and amended the operating agreement, everything, the LLC, bank accounts, and everything like that. We split it down the middle, and that's what it's been.
Did you call him Woody?
No, I said that's what it's been.
Oh, okay.
But, yeah. So. Yeah, and since then, we've hired together, we fired together, and and now it's just a normal partnership.
So during the crisis, everyone kind of responded a little bit differently. Some people kind of put their head in their turtle shell. Some people went harder. What did you guys do?
We didn't do neither. We kept doing what we was doing. And we did notice for probably about 45 days, we did notice the sellers pull back a little bit. I just want to wait till this. I want to wait till we see what's going on with this, right? And then it seemed like people noticed that this ain't going away. This is new world, right? And then it got back to normal. So that's what happened. We didn't scale up marketing. We didn't slow down marketing, but we did notice kind of like a drop in activity and sellers willing to kind of move forward with the sale. But like I said, after probably about 45, 60 days, people started acting normal.
So did your business go up or did it stay even?
No, during like 30 days, we definitely had a dip.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think, I'm trying to think, when was COVID? I think, bro, we had a bad month. We had a month that we did like $30,000. And I think, that was like right when, that the COVID just shook everybody up and nobody could think of anything except this, this thing that's going around. So.
All right. So Byron is the mad genius, it sounds like. Right? The genius behind the computer.
A different type of mad genius.
But he's the genius behind the computer.
For sure.
You're out in the field?
Neither one of us in the field. Acquisition managers in the field.
Okay. So then what are you responsible for?
Yeah, so of course, just the creative finance piece, putting together, making sure that leads that come through our pipeline, we fully assess it and make sure that we're not leaving anything on the table. Can we structure this a different way? Can we offer this seller something different so we can monetize this lead? So that's one thing, bringing that to the table, right? Because a lot of people miss out on a fortune because they can't evaluate a deal other than assign it to a cash buyer. That's one thing. Training and coaching. I'm the teacher. I'm still the teacher by heart, right? So acquisition managers, I'm teaching them. Every when it comes to teaching, motivation, culture, ideas, that's kind of where I kind of shine at.
Got it.
And marketing. I handle marketing too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you just described as far as a creative guy, squeezing the juice out of every single deal, because who knows how much money we're throwing away. I want to hire that guy to work for us. How do I find a guy that's like that's sharp, that would want to work for somebody?
That's a good question. I think you have to have already train that guy. I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
So why had you come out here? Come on.
I don't know the answer to that. So I'm gonna tell you what we've done. Right. Our top acquisition manager, man, he's a killer, and he's an older guy. He's like 52. But we taught. He's just a closer. He's a real kind of got like narcissistic personality, but man, he's a closer. He's a closer. He rubs people, but he's a closer. And we just put a few more tools in his tool belt. And it just made him that more dangerous.
Got it.
And then our other acquisition manager, which also is a realtor, he kind of had a blurry vision of it, looking at YouTube or whatever, and we just crystallized that vision so he could really understand it. Now they're equipped. Now they go to talk to sellers, and they can make more than one offer when cash isn't a fit. So
they're ready. They have the tools. So your job is to make sure that they didn't miss anything.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay. And then you've got the app. What's the app?
Man, the app is any deal. So, like I said, when I was working 50 to 70 hours a week, I'm like, man, they got full-time investors out here, man. How I'm going to keep up and grab the deals when I'm stuck at work all day and they're out there in the streets? And how I originally learned this real estate and how I was originally taught wasn't wholesaling. I was taught, when I came into the game in 2014, I wasn't taught wholesaling. I was taught, hey, your goal as an investor is to find motivated sellers. These are all different ways you could complete a transaction. When the lead comes in, based on what the seller needs, you put it in that box. And that's how I learned. Everybody comes up under a different type of philosophy.
Yeah.
And so that that way of doing it was so effective for me because it just allowed me, okay, if they won't accept a deep discount and willing to give their property away for pennies on the dollar, I have a way that I can offer them more, right, that they're happy with, and also it's gonna make me money and, you know, set me up financially in the future. So based on that multiple offer strategy, we created Any Deal. And Any Deal is just a mobile app that allows you to analyze and make multiple offers to a seller. So you could ask from your cell phone, you can actually send a seller a letterhead template that has, you know, 1 to 3 offers. And what I found, Steve, is that, because, you know, I admire the hardcore closers. What I admire is you don't even have to do all of that. You don't have to convince a seller of nothing. You talk to them, you make a friend, you build rapport, right? Just like a doctor, does it hurt here? When does it hurt? Okay, and how long have you been noticing this, right? I get all the symptoms, and then I give you a prescription.
Yeah.
But it's not my idea. I just put it in the air. What if? And they usually grab it. People want to feel like they made their own decision. So when I send this to you via text, email, right, or over the counter, the tabletop, you know, Mr. Seller, based on what you shared with me, blah, 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 this, and that, you know, recapping, you know, here's what I can do, right? You let me know which one is a better fit.
Yeah.
And now they feel like, whoa, I got options. This is not this investor that's coming to my house, jumping on my floors, like looking at my roof and, you know, trying to make me feel bad about my property, man.
Right.
He cares and he gives me options. And before I give those options of how I could purchase the property, I'm already going to give you your other options that doesn't even involve me. Right?
Right.
Listening with the realtor, renting it, keeping it, right, etc. Right. And it just works like really well.
And then, do you track what your average fee is?
Average deal size? Assignment fee? Yeah. So we're at like $8,500 right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to get that up, but yeah, that's our average assignment fee.
And then, to do the kind of deals you guys are doing right now, what are you guys spending every month on marketing?
Guess what, man? We don't even actually spend a fortune on marketing. I think last month we only spent like $3,000.
Dang.
The most we've ever spent in a month was $11,000. Yeah, but we average about $6,000 a month on. That's not like the average, about $6,000.
And about total overhead, including office space, everybody.
We work from home. That's a number that I don't know. Like just off top. Let me see some numbers I know off the top of my head. I know cost per lead for RVM, where we're at right now. We're at $38 cost per lead. Cold calling, we're like $41 cost per lead. So those some other. We were trying Facebook, but our cost per lead was pretty high. So our average cost per lead, but we just shut that off, is like $68. But we just shut Facebook off for now.
Gotcha. Corey Guzman wants to know who mentored you.
Who?
Like how did you learn who did you learn the creative game from?
A couple of guys, man. Ron LeGrand, Phil Puskiowski, and just the internet and some local guys that just some old guys nobody would know that's in my market that just kicking up dust.
It's crazy how much those older guys know.
Oh man, and they don't tell anybody.
No, they're quiet. Like
no brand or nothing.
That's the one thing. Is like some of these old school guys, I would never want to negotiate against them. Like
They got some people that nobody would know that's just doing such crazy things, and they've been doing it for decades, right? So many creative strategies, go and pay people's taxes and find out a way to eventually get the possession of the property. So
yeah, there's some crazy ideas out there.
Yeah.
So Toby Ema wants to know, what's your take on being in a saturated market and still trying to do deals?
Man, I don't think there's no such thing. So when you talk saturation, I think, competition. So of course, the thing that's normally affected when there's a lot of people is highly competitive is usually your cost per lead goes up. That's been my experience, right? However, I think a better approach is to find a niche or an angle that everybody else, because people are lazy. People are just going to go for the path of least resistance, right? So find that area, that niche that you really can just be the best at, and whatever your perceived competition is, it just goes away.
Right. That's a great point. And Francisco Jassa wants to know, what are the rule of thumbs for seller finance terms?
Seller finance terms. Number one, the property has to pay for itself, right? Property has to pay for itself. Another thing with creative finance, one of my rules of thumb, aside that the property needs to pay for itself, don't go through the entrance unless you already know the exits. And this is for safety anyway, in this crazy world that we live in, right? If I go in the movie theater, I already want to know the exits, right? So be in a position where you have a plan B, C, etc. So that's 2. So make sure you have multiple exits before you go through the front door. Make sure the property can pay for itself. Also, the best of the best creative finance guys knows this. Just like a wholesale deal, where your buyer, you don't close the transaction. The buyer's funds closes the transaction on a wholesale deal.
Right.
Same thing with creative finance. When you contract a creative finance deal, whether it's subject to, wholesale, wraparound mortgage, lease option, ideally before you close escrow, right, you're marketing to find that buyer, whether it's an owner finance buyer, a tenant buyer, right? So that's another tip, is get your buyer lined up, right, before you close. Like I'm not gonna close naked if I don't have to. Closing naked means that I close the deal and now I'm gonna do whatever I need and then market it. It's kind of, because you got holding costs.
Right.
So that's another rule of thumb. That's just a few off the top of the head.
What's your favorite tool as far as creative finance?
Actually, owner finance is number 1. Right. It's not subject to.
Yeah.
It's number 1, even though the majority of my portfolio is subject to, right? Because people are usually more motivated when they don't have many options, right? Usually when somebody has a house free and clear, it's kind of like, oh, I got all this equity. So, but owner finance, of course, over subject to, because of course, all of these things that people are scared about, which you can also mitigate, right? Like an underlying mortgage in somebody else's name and all that. You ain't got to worry about none of that. Owner finance. It's just me and you.
Sleep real good with owner finance.
Sleep real good with owner finance. And also, guess what? You could do on owner finance that you can't do on subject to. That I do a lot.
What's that?
You could negotiate 0% interest.
Right.
And you can't even do that if you got excellent credit. Principal only payments.
Yeah.
So, owner finance number 1.
Got it. And then Nelson wants to know, can you talk about you selling wholesale deals using the MLS?
Ooh, spicy. Okay. So what happens in this? I mean, how deep did you want to go? So
let's go. We got time.
Okay. So basically, on a strategy like this, what we do is we get a deal under contract at the deepest discount possible with the seller, right? And then we market our equitable interest on the MLS. In the agent-to-agent remarks, of course, we disclose that the seller is a principal in the transaction, marketing equitable interest. Now, here's the tricky part that people don't know. And I'm telling you, some of the top gurus, I've seen it. They say you can't do this. I'm like, no, we do it. So when your buyer comes, right? Because you can't wholesale a deal. If you do that, you got to say cash only. When your buyer comes, let's say conventional loan, FHA loan. Of course, with the underwriter, they're going to want the actual person on title to be on the contract. So what we do is the report has to be built, and there's a way that we kind of explain this to the seller, right? Our buyer goes under contract with our seller, and of course, yes, they see that that's not the price that you agreed on. But there's, we have how we kind of talk to them and, where they're okay with it, right? And at that point, it's a normal transaction. There's no title seasoning involved, right? Because we haven't changed title yet. And instead of an assignment fee, we get paid from a memo release. So we reverse engineer and calculate, the agent, because we do calculate the 3% to the buyer's agent, and we try to get a flat fee listing on the seller's side to get it on the MLS to get this maximum exposure. Right. And then at closing, we get paid from a memo release. That's how we pull that off.
There you go.
Yeah. So.
And then let's see. A lot of people tell us what we should be doing to be successful in this. What are the top 3 things that we shouldn't do? Great question by Don Rich. 3 things people should not do in this business.
Be an info junkie. And because when you get too many types of ideas and inputs, you usually just freeze up. Kind of like with sellers. A confused mind says no. When I'm talking to a seller, until we get to like the final thing, I'm not talking subject to. They don't know what that is. It's gonna scare them, right? You don't want to know. You don't want the easiest way to get the let me talk to my attorney objection. Start saying words that the seller don't understand. Right. So I would say not getting too many inputs, because a confused mind says no. And also, if somebody trying to get traction, if they're confused because they have too many, this person says do this person says that, they end up doing nothing until in their mind they figure it out.
Right.
And it's just kind of like a bad place to be. You just kind of like just don't do anything.
Yeah, that's one.
Another,
two more.
Yeah, so another one is consistency. I know it sounds so cliche, but if you're consistent, you actually don't have to just exert so much effort. I know you know about the old like fable, like the tortoise and the hare, but it's a parable that is so true.
Yeah.
This person is a Ferrari, then he stops, then he stops, and this person is just, you're gonna get there.
Yeah.
So just don't stop. Keep going. The third one probably should have been number one. Surround yourself with the best of the best.
Yeah. So then I guess the don't do is just to stay away from toxic people.
Don't do. Yeah, don't do. So don't try to avoid people with limiting beliefs, people that make you that question if you can do it. If you're around somebody and the energy and the vibe you get when you leave that person's presence, you feel if you feel discouraged, less confident, discouraged, that's not the right energy you need to be around.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's a great point. Justin Henry wants to know, so you're sending multiple offers at a time?
Yeah. And it works like magic. Yeah.
And Frederick Gagel wants to know, how do you get that app?
TheAnyDealApp.com. It's on iOS. It's on Android.
CJ Wilson wants to know, are you opening up your course again?
Yeah, I'm working on it. Man, we've been focused on the business, man. We really, investors, man.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you use a different strategy to find owner finance buyers?
Yeah, slightly. What we found is that owner finance buyers, we found the best thing that works is Facebook Marketplace and bandit signs. They work really, really, really well for that. For cash buyers, we kind of do reverse lookups, data, close comps, skip trace them, reverse list source hack, things like that. But Facebook and bandit signs for owner finance lease option buyers works well.
And Alexis Adams wants to know, what list are you pulling for creative finance?
Pulling a lot, of course. Absentee owners. I mean, it's the one of the bread and butters. Matter of fact, on my very last YouTube video, I dropped a list that we've been pulling. You could just fast forward to the end of the video. I do a little quick training. A list that we've been pulling that's been hot, right? And it's a prop stream list, and I walk everybody through the filters we pull. So that's one of the lists that's been really hot. Another list is expired listings, right? So people that have raised their hand to sell, but they were unsuccessful. High days on market, right? So people that have, and what's high to me is at least like 5 months. Or, you could stick with 6 months, 180 days. Yep. So people that their property has been on the market a while. And
then Ben wants to know, what are the 3 offers that you usually send?
Cash is going to be first. The next, if the property has a mortgage, is going to be subject to. And so I might do 2 variations of subject to, right? One might be like long term, and one might have a balloon on it, right? If they don't have if they own it free and clear, it's going to be something like cash. Owner finance with maybe like a little down payment, a really small down payment, and the third is going to be owner finance, but it's going to be like no down payment, but it's going to be like longer term. So they kind of like. Looks like as you go down, you get more money, but I give you less up front. Yeah. So
Jory Alston says that he loves those 0% interest deals. I think everyone does, Jory.
What's going on, Jory?
All right. So let's just pretend, you're at the house. Right? I mean, you talk about presenting the offers, but you also have to explain it.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I think a lot of people screw up, you already talked about, the best way to get the attorney involved is say sub to and use all these other big words. Yeah. So let's pretend I'm a homeowner and I have no idea what's going on.
Right.
How are you going to pitch this to me? It's creative finance.
Creative finance.
Let's just say I got a mortgage on it.
Got you. So Mr. Seller, if I was going to pay cash for your property, I'm going to, need to be somewhere between, $60,000 to $70,000. I'm going to shut up.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. It's like, So, and it depends as far as the pre-conversation if I'm even saying that right, because there's a bunch of other stuff we didn't talked about. So then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play. See, instead of talking too much, I'm gonna play dumb, right? I'm gonna play dumb. So when I get that emotion from you, just kind of like God, you're defeated. Man, he's Kemba. I'm gonna mimic that. And almost like I'm trying to figure it out too, but I don't know what I already got. Mr. Seller, what if there's a way that I can take over on your mortgage payments and get you cashed out down the road? Does that sound like something we should talk about? Or probably not.
No, that's what does that look like?
Yeah, great question. So Steve, how that will work is we would take over on the mortgage payments. All right, so we'll be making payments directly to the bank on your behalf. So all this stuff, taxes, insurance, maintenance, all of that stuff will be off for you. Of course, the loan will remain in your name, and when the market allows, we'll get that cashed out.
What happens if you miss a payment?
That's a great question. So what happens if I miss a payment? All right. So of course, that's going to affect your credit.
I don't want you to mess up my credit.
Yeah. So, Mr. Seller, we're in the business to make money. This is an investment for us. So, of course, that makes no sense for us. But we can actually structure this in a way that if we become 30 days past due, you actually get the property back, and all the improvements we've made, the down payment we've given you, the debt pay down, all that goes to you. So we actually get to shorten the stick. So.
All right.
Yeah. So that's kind of like where we go with that. Really, the basis is that's the subject to, but also even with subject to and seller finance, this is how simple I make it for a third grader, Steve. Steve, what if there's a way that I could give you more money? Steve, there's a way that I can work with you. I can come closer to your asking price. I think I can help you out. What if there's a way I can give you more money? Is that something we should talk about or probably not? So what I'm doing is getting micro commitments because you don't want to say too much because it's too much for them to digest. I just want them to agree to one little concept, right? Go a step further, right? And then, basically the premise is I can give you more money if you're willing to give me more time. Does that sound fair?
It's very fair. So one thing I'm working on for our sales training is just a list of words that we're no longer allowed to say. Yeah. Right?
What are some of those?
Sub 2.
Sub 2, yeah.
Terms, retail, ARV, right? You got a list of words that are no-nos?
I got a couple, not that many. Contract is definitely one.
Yeah.
Subject to is one. Wraparound mortgages. Wraparound mortgages.
Man, I can't imagine the seller's face when you say wraparound mortgage.
And it's crazy? I think that's actually one of the safest terms offers.
Well, it probably is, but you try to say wraparound, like what?
Man, what? Bank fraud, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really have that many. What I tell my people is just, first of all, don't talk too much. You need to be active listening, right?
Yeah.
And don't try to make yourself sound smart.
All right.
Make it simple as a third grader. And another thing, if you don't know the answer, don't try to make it up because they're going to catch you. Oh. And people are going to respect if you do something like this, So what happens if something? Actually, Mr. Sell, that's a great question. Let me speak with my attorney, and I can get you that answer in an hour. How does that sound? And they respect that because they see you leverage experts. Let me actually get with my title company about that, and I can have you an answer by the end of the day.
Right.
And people think that if someone asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, it discredits you. But I'm telling you, if you be confident in what you know and what you don't know, you just say, let me leverage my expert. Yeah. They like it. So
let me go YouTube that for you.
Let me go YouTube. Yeah. Don't say that.
David Galan wants to know, have you tried doing anything as creative as far as using Bitcoin?
No. No. I'm mad I missed the wave, though.
Yeah. Max Maxwell, during Closers Olympics, like, Steve, why didn't you offer that guy Bitcoin? I was like, what? There's this guy he wanted me to give him 80,000 gold, right? And I was actually totally open to doing it, but he's like, man, why'd you offer that guy Bitcoin? I was like, I've never thought to offer a person Bitcoin. But
what was he trying to avoid? Taxes or something?
Yeah, an IRS judgment. Didn't want to get paid on at closing.
That is creative.
Right? It's like, I want to get paid outside escrow. I was like, well, what does that look like? He's like, I want 80,000 gold. Like,
bring him a gold bar.
I mean, for the number he wanted, it made sense, but I couldn't commit to that. In front of 1,000 people. It was like me and you in the living room. I was like,
got
you. I can do that. Like, yeah, like, let's go to the gold medal place right now. Yeah. So, guys, ask any more questions. We got Brian here. He's doing deals creatively. Oh, you know what we didn't talk about? So one thing we talked about was you're feeling a little guilty
about
working 20 hours a week.
Yeah, but you made me feel so much better when you told me about your favorite interview.
Right.
Yeah.
So right now, for most people, they're so busy working, hustling, and grinding. If they can get it done under 60 hours a week, they're feeling pretty good. It's like even 40 is tough.
Yeah.
What are you doing
to make that happen?
To get it to 20?
Bro, I'm going to tell you one of the biggest things that I had, and this is just based on my experience. I don't know if this is the secret sauce, but a great team. Mm-hmm. Man, having the right people work for your team and with you does it all, it does everything. So when you can close your eyes, when you can leave and you know that you have real hustlers that's going to put up buckets, right? When you know that on that court, right, when you sprain your ankle, the score, guys are not going to get behind by 30, 40 points. You can actually take a breather. Mm-hmm. I think that's the secret. So the secret for us being able to do that is being able to let the power players do what they do and then just offer support and guidance. Yeah.
So then how do you get those players?
I think the people you attract are going to be a reflection of you. Because naturally, Steve, if I don't respect you, mm-hmm. if I don't believe in you, I'm probably not going to work for you. I'm going to feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Because for somebody to come work for you and feel like there's security because most people, they got families. To feel security that, I'm just as safe as a normal job. I'm going to continue to have, get paid or whatever. Like, they got to believe in you. So I think working on yourself, just probably not what you expected to hear, but I think working on yourself and being the person that you want to attract is probably the best way to get those people.
So how do you work on yourself?
Personal development, man. Personal development, that's a whole rabbit hole. And I went through that rabbit hole around 2013. I deleted all my social media. Jim Rohn is one of my favorites. And
Jim Rohn's amazing.
Man, I feel like that guy's probably my mentor, mm-hmm. But in that, it started the whole rabbit hole of the Bob Proctors, the Earl Nightingales, all these people, Napoleon Hills. But, when you start the personal development kind of little rabbit hole, mm-hmm. you'll know what I'm talking about. So that's how you do it.
So I think
learn the secrets of success.
The key here, though, is you were doing that when you started a job.
Yeah.
See, when I had a job, I was uncoachable. When I had a job, they're like, Steve, you should go to this thing we're doing is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I was like, I don't need that. What do I need that for? Right?
Yeah.
But at that time, I was like, I'm working, my job at Intel. Like, why do I need to be more effective? Like, I'm good.
Yeah.
But you were doing that while you had your job, and that kind of opened.
Yeah, and the reason why is because I wanted more, and I was just like, man, this ain't working, right?
Yeah.
I started searching for the secrets, and what I learned is, the phrase, asking you, mm-hmm. if you go searching, right? This is not a word, but everything is figure outable, right? Mm-hmm. So if you go searching and looking, instead of just sitting, I wish it could be better, you're going to find what you need.
Right.
And what I found was this area called personal development, mm-hmm. and I fell in love with it. And once that personal development kind of met real estate, it was a nice chemistry. And
yeah. So Max Jimenez, you saw him when you walked in. That's his guy, Jim Rohn. Right. Jim Rohn's his guy. So,
who's guy?
Max.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's his guy. Like, of all the stuff we've learned, all the stuff we've listened, all the personal development we've gone through, Jim Rohn's still his guy.
See, I knew I like Max.
Yeah.
Man, there's so many things from Jim Rohn that I can quote word for word in his voice, in his tonality. Yeah. Like he was like one of the best.
He was the
He's
best.
the Jordan of that. Yeah.
One of my favorite lines is still like, how do you stay so good? It's like, man, I go to these seminars. I can't wait to listen to the guy. All right, so Dominic Baca wants to know, just starting out 2 months in, he's got 2 deals in escrow, so great job. Another contract signed minutes ago.
Great job.
Advice on next steps.
Invest a portion of that back into marketing. Don't make the mistake I made. And do it again, and do it again, and do it again.
Yeah.
And also document what it took for you to do those deals.
Yeah. I think that's big. And you're talking about documenting on social media.
No, I'm
talking
talking
about documenting on Word doc.
No, I'm talking about the KPIs.
Yeah.
Like, to do those, how much did you spend? How long did it take? How many people you talked to? You know, that.
Yeah. I would say also do document on social media. Nelson Del Castillo wants to know, are you guys 100% commission, or are they salary, or what?
We got different roles. So acquisitions, dispositions, 100% commission. Our admin, our KPI, admin that does payroll, the KPI that does analytics, and our cold callers are all salary hourly. But acquisitions, dispositions, commissions.
Cool.
Only.
And Johnny Macon wants to know, how many rentals did you have before you quit your job?
Probably about 12. Yeah.
Cool. And then Ron Ward wants to know, what are some of the KPIs you focus on in your business on a daily basis?
Leads, number 1. Cost per lead, probably number 2. Those are the top 2, but we track a lot of stuff. We track, call dials, right, for the cold callers, the dials, the contact rate. We track cost per deal, cost per contract. Of course, deals sold. A lot of stuff. Marketing attempts, but the main 2 things. The main 2 things is leads and cost per leads is our top 2.
All right. So as a business owner, what KPI is Brian responsible for?
Leads, cost per leads.
So the marketing KPIs.
Contracts, yeah. Acquisitions, contracts.
All right. So if the cost per lead is going a little high, Byron can have a sit down with Brian.
Yeah.
All right. Just want to make sure. And then Justin Henry wants to know, what's your process when certain strategies are not working?
R&D, research and development. We break it down depending on where the problem is, right? If it's a departmental thing in that meeting, because how we do, we have meetings during the week for every department. We have a sit down, and during that meeting that come up in the issues component, and we'll just break it down like that.
And that's the key, is to having a time every week to talk about issues. And then Shard Bennett wants to know, do you still pay for trainings or mastermind groups with other seasoned investors?
Oh, I don't know. Is this TV? Can encourage them? Like,
You do whatever you want.
Hell yeah. Look, man, we practice what we preach, and I'm pretty sure you, Steve, still invest, in these. Matter of fact, I was just going to, it didn't really align with my schedule. I was actually going to go, I think, to Cancun to a mastermind not too long ago. Thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
I know Carlos and Sal. I invested in Momentum in 2019. Still to this day, I invest my money into more training and mentorship. And it's funny because you kind of see people online just kind of like this and like they don't want to pay for course. I'm like, yo, y'all don't know the secret sauce is getting more education.
Well, I mean, maybe they'll live long enough
to find out the cheat code.
Or to learn it the hard way to catch us.
Yeah.
Because it's time or money. Please give us some gym. I don't know what that is. Do you have... gym. Give us some gym. Jim Rohn. Got it. Do you have VAs available for hires?
Oh, no. I don't have a VA company, if that's what they're asking.
Yeah. Let's see, what else is there. What do you think got you from averaging $50K a month to $100K a month?
A team and systems, and of course KPIs. Just knowing what's working and what's not, and being able to make that tweak in the right direction. Because if you're not tracking, you don't know what way you need to go.
A real system. And Alexis wants to know, how often do you market to the same list until you update the list?
Great question. So it depends on like the list. Usually we update our list like something like pre-foreclosures, right? We're probably pulling that like weekly, but like absentee owners, like a 90-day stretch before we update it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tax delinquents, we'll market to those for up to 6 months before we update those.
And then Nelson Del Castillo wants to know, how many cold call leads do you need to close one contract to close in today's market?
That depends on your market.
What about you?
Leads per contract. Off the top of my head, I don't know the number.
And then House Buying Diddy says, what's up?
Yo.
All right, so what is your why? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Fulfillment. I knew when I was teaching, I knew when I was working in the oil and gas field, there was something in my gut, right? I don't have to get off philosophical. You just feel like this isn't it. So my why is just to feel that alignment, to do something that actually feels like this is why I'm here. Mm-hmm. Freedom is a part of that, but also impact. And so that's the reason I'm doing it. When I got into real estate, of course, it was for freedom and for financials. But I noticed something, Steve. I noticed when I got into real estate, because something about me, I love talking to strangers. I love meeting new people. Mm-hmm. I'm just genuinely curious about how people think, what they're going through, why they did that, their life experience. When I got into real estate, I was like, yo, this is what this business is. Mm-hmm. This is the business for me. So that's my why, man. It's just fulfillment. I like it.
Yeah.
So that my why is, impacting people, being free, and doing what I want, with my time. Doing something that makes me feel good,
Love it. And Chris Jefferson says hi as well.
CJ.
Guys, please, if you guys are getting value today, please tag somebody. Let them know. All right, and then Johnny Forte wants to know, are you using PPC?
Not right now. We did rock with PPC for quite a while. I actually did PPC for about four or 5 years. Did we do any in 2020?
So you got it when it was good.
Yeah. Cost per lead kind of drove up.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, and how here's I'm gonna tell you one of the biggest issues we had with PPC is that how our company is structured and how we set up, because we don't do the office thing. We really want that freedom and mobility. So response time. PPC leads is not a type of lead that you could kind of wait, because if they go to the top of the search engine, they click this and they call you and you don't respond, guess where they're going? To the next one, right? So it's almost like it's like a game show. You gotta. So that's another reason, because I set up it was kind of, we was missing.
Yeah.
Opportunities.
What is your biggest struggle right now? Sounds like everything's pretty good.
Biggest struggle. I don't know. Honestly, man, trying to figure out what to focus most time on. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm still kind of, unknowing. Is it more into the business and trying to scale it even bigger? Is it content and branding and just kind of putting more stuff out there? Should I be trying to do more coaching? All of that. Just finding what should deserve the most amount of time. Just kind of, really still trying to deep dive and figure out where you want to invest all that extra free time.
What have you done to figure out the answer?
Obviously not the right thing. Just thinking, going in circles.
Yeah, I love it. All right, so Mason Aiken wants to know, what percentage of your deals are you doing are traditional cash offer wholesale deals?
So we're about 30%. 30% creative finance, 70%. Cash, because I kind of talk that noise about it, but it's the foundation. It's the wholesale is the foundation. So everything we set up is a wholesale operation, but we have the systems to put it in the bucket that it needs to be in.
Right. So
the majority is still wholesale.
So Keith Everett wants to know then, how do you determine whether to wholesale or keep it?
Right. To wholesale it, or it to be like terms?
No, to keep it.
To keep it?
As a rental.
To keep it as a rental, I'm not gonna wholesale it at all if I could keep it. I mean, because wholesale it for what? You're gonna wholesale it to So,
if it's up to you, you would keep everyone as a rental.
Absolutely. I mean, just I would try. So.
All right.
Another thing though, Steve, is the seller, right? So if a cash offer doesn't work for the seller, right, then I'm trying to find out how I can give them more money, and of course that's usually gonna come up with me owning the property long term.
Right. And then I don't know if Shard or Charday. Bennett wants to know what separates you from other investors. Why should she buy your course versus anybody else's course?
What course? You get me? I mean, I'm pretty sure most investors.
Charday, dang it.
Yeah, most investors, you're not getting their time anymore. Personally,
yeah.
The majority of them, right? It's
tough.
It's actually a course, and right now I don't have a course, right? So I actually it's like more so group mentorship. So it's not kind of like, hey, go watch these videos. You're on your own, right? You actually talk to me.
Right. Gotcha. And then Johnny Forte wants to know, are you using novation agreements to list the properties on MLS without buying it?
I'm not, but I heard Pace Morby talk about it. I think Pace Morby's the man for that.
Yeah.
I know nothing about novation agreements.
Oh, you and I could talk offline about that.
Yeah.
Why not do net listings in Texas?
That's a great question. I don't know. It's just not super popular.
Because net listings are illegal in most states.
Let me.
But it's legal in Texas.
Let me back it up, because I mean it's been rusty. I let my real estate license expire the same year I got it. No, I'm just playing, like the next year. So is net listings basically when it's kind of like anything over this is mine? That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, like, because we have.
You might have put me on a gold mine, man. Maybe I need to reactivate it and.
I think so, because novations are kind of tough in Texas, because they want the exclusive listing agreement, and the purchase contract signed by the sellers. Like, the titles won't do it. You can't do power of attorney or anything like that in Texas, but you can do a net listing.
So school me real quick. What is a novation agreement?
Novation is when you substitute. So let's say you contract with the seller,
okay,
right? And then you got this agreement, like the very first deal you did where you substitute, or you're talking about release a memorandum, right? You got paid a release a memo fee.
Right.
That's a novation. It's just substituting you as the buyer with the buyer you found from the MLS, and you got paid something to do it. So what you're doing is a release a memorandum. Other people would use a novation methodology where you're just substituting the contract and you're getting paid the difference. Oh. Same exact concept that you talked about.
So basically what I did.
What you do. But you do it with a power of attorney. However, Texas title companies don't like using a power of attorney, so people in our program, instead of using a novation, we just tell them go get your license and just do net listing.
Texas is a different beast, man. A lot of stuff I see other people do in other markets.
If they ever become their own country, I will go support you.
I'm coming.
I'm coming. This country's going crazy.
So, a lot of people like to maybe take something down on a finance or subject to it and sell it on a lease option. And honestly, that would be my favorite combination or hybrid, right? Yeah. But, because of, how much things you have to go through, it's easier. And most real estate attorneys just give them the deed, right? Because Texas has one of the fastest foreclosure states. I just got a property back last month, right? And I got one property back, had to go through, attorney, right? And I got another property where the buyer just did the right thing. He was in there about a year and like 4 months. He couldn't afford it anymore. Him and his wife split, and he just said, Mr. Brown, I don't want to hold up your property. I can't afford it. Man, older guy, I said, look, Mr. Carey, and I agreed to actually give him some money and deed the property back to me. But it's better off in Texas, man. If you want to do something like that, just give them the deed. If they default, it's pretty simple to get the property back.
Right.
Versus like those other states.
And then a follow-up question from Johnny Forte is, are you using forced appreciation on your rentals and creative deals to save on taxes?
We mean forced appreciation, like improving the property?
I think they're probably saying like a really high price on well, I guess you're not selling it, so I'm not really sure. What is your superpower?
That's a good one. I think I'm still figuring it out. You know, all the people around me, you know, friends, business partners, they all tell me about my superpowers, but I can't articulate it. I mean, that it's, but I don't know what it is. I think it's people, man. I don't know. It's the ability to attract people and put their guards down. I don't know.
I mean, I was gonna say you're like really damn likable, so maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, I can't put something. I can't really put it in words, but man, I just thank God for whatever it is, and I know it's something.
So if I asked Byron this question, what would he say is your superpower?
Probably getting attention. I don't know, and having an eye, just having an eye, having an idea for creative solutions, creative ideas, being able to peep and, you know, just how my brain works. It really works really different than, you know, most how I conceptualize things. So I don't know, something along those lines.
And if I asked Max, what would he say?
He's gonna say likable.
Likable.
Yeah, because me and Max talked about that. Man. Max, I mean, I give Max a lot of credit for a lot of, you know, over these last few years, just kind of like, you know, the friendship, you know, and you know, he basically said that. He was like, bro, like, we're kind of like, this is, he spelled it out. It's like the same thing. Likable, being able to talk and people listen.
Yeah, the ability to connect.
Say, yeah.
All right, and then we'll wrap up with what is the greatest lesson that you have learned?
The greatest lesson that I've learned. I'm gonna keep it real estate, so the question will be easier for me to come up with an answer. Man, don't count your eggs before they hatch. Real estate, bro. There's always another document that's needed, right? It's always something that could, you know, like in the hallway, I was just telling you, he was asking me about my pipes, and I said, yeah, I had a couple pipes bust on a few properties I own, and then one that is in escrow that was supposed to close last Friday, right? The sellers, a pipe busted and they got to pull up all the floors or whatever. So in real estate, man, do not get ahead of yourself counting chickens that haven't hatched, because what law? I'm telling you. Is it Murphy?
Murphy's Law. Yeah. What can go wrong will go wrong.
Yeah. So that's my biggest lesson, man. Just going ahead and counting the chicken. Oh, I got 30,000 coming in.
Don't spend that money yet.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So just think about a thought you want to leave the listeners with. Guys, if you guys like this show, please like, comment, subscribe, share. It really helps us out, really helps us with our mission to create 100 millionaires. And we do have our workshop coming up on the 5th, so 9 days from today. So if you guys are interested, let me know. We can still send you up an invite. And then next week we got Jerry Green and Josh Culler flying out here. Talk about, you know, what they're doing in Ohio. So last thoughts.
Yeah, so I would say don't get hypnotized by society's view of what success looks like, right? Run your own journey, run your own race, enjoy the present moment right now, because as entrepreneurs, people that have high ambitions, we always want to push back success or happiness till you achieve a certain thing, and it doesn't work like that, right? When I'll get this, then I'll be happy. When I achieve this, then I'll truly be happy. When I get here, then it's there. And it's just it's a race, and you actually never, it's like chasing the rainbow. So find a way to enjoy life, this moment, and don't get hypnotized by other people's version of success. Run your race.
You know what's crazy? This hit me when I learned this. I read this. I've you know, multiple times you hear it, right?
All right.
So I had my dream car on my list, right? An Audi S4. Like this is like, I know at some point in my life I'm gonna buy this and I'm gonna love it, right? So it was on my list, so I buy it. I was not any happier. I was not. I was like, oh, this is it. It's crazy.
Why do we do that? Why do you think we do that?
I don't know. We keep telling ourselves that. So you have to learn, you have to mature to realize, oh, you gotta enjoy the journey, like you said, right? Every day.
So, I mean, because it's tough, because by having goals, that is what makes you move forward, something to work towards, right? So I do feel like you should always work towards something, but like, it's not healthy to attach your feeling of happiness with that goal.
Right.
So, I mean, what was your advice on how to have goals that push you to move forward, but not having it where it's like, how do you feel about this whole thing?
It just can't be material goals. I think is what it is. Can't be material goals. So like, it's the maturity in that, right? So now I realize like that's not it. But there's also something, the fire in me, right? So like I preach like don't chase. But truth be told, I'm also chasing Grant Cardone. I'm trying to catch him to be the number one sales trainer in the country, right? But I'm not willing to sacrifice time with family, right? Like time with family is time with family. So that's just non-negotiable. So I think there's a healthier balance now, but it can't be financial. It can't be material. Like those things are not the goals. They feel like the goals. They feel like targets. Those are just nice to haves. They're not. They cannot be.
I got an interesting question.
Yeah.
'Cause I like your perception on some things. Look, so you said something about balance, right? Mm-hmm. I heard something not too long ago that kind of blew my mind, right? It was on Clubhouse. I forgot who said it. But balance. Said something about balance doesn't really exist, right?
Yeah, it's garbage.
As far as entrepreneurship and really go, because look at this. I was like, whoa, that was nice. He said, because when you're in balance, you're out of focus. Mm-hmm. And when you're focused, you're out of balance. And I was like, wow, that's major. How do you feel about balance? Do you feel, if you're really trying to achieve something, because everybody wants balance. Like, mm-hmm. Do you feel like balance is a thing, or do you feel like people 100%. Should be trying to chase balance when they're trying to chase a goal?
I think they absolutely should be chasing balance while they're chasing the goal. I think that everyone says you should sacrifice a little bit to chase your goals. And that was me, right? Hustle, grind. Don't pay yourself. Put all the money back into the business. Like I was that guy, right? Working to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning for many, many years to chase your dream. And I still preach that, right, in the beginning. You got to, when you're trying to get the well going. You got to pump. You got to prime the pump. You get the well going. Yeah. You got to grind. You got to hustle, right? But eventually, you can absolutely achieve balance if that's your desire.
Gotcha.
If that's your intention. And you can't say I want balance. You got to say this is what balance looks like, and I'm going to be disciplined enough to create this. So, for example, I won't work on Saturdays no matter what. I got time blocks for family all in the calendar. And it's kind of weird to treat your family like a business where you got a time block and schedule and this and that. Mm-hmm. But if you don't do that, that's what's getting sacrificed first. So on my calendar, family is first, and I fit the business where it can fit. That's
funny because most people do it the other way around. Like I'm a grind. If I have some free time, then I'm a hang on.
The family gets the rest of me, not the best of me, right?
It's funny. You said, going towards a goal and sacrifice and stuff. Jim Rohn made me think of a Jim Rohn thing. He said, some things in life, it cost me. He said, I think you should go out and get it. I think you should go and chase your goals. But some things just cost me too much.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely.
Like that time with family. And mm-hmm. So some things aren't even worth it.
Yeah, you can't get back that time with family. That time cannot be received back. And you might think, I'll spend time with my kids when they're older. I'm going to sacrifice right now for my business. But when I'm older, I'll spend more time with my kids. Man, when you're older, they don't even want to spend time with you. And in their minds, like, you didn't even have time for me then.
Yeah.
Why? Like,
so that's that. It's deep down in there, and
it's programmed.
Solves a relationship.
You're second place. Business is first. Family is second. They've been programmed their whole lives. Like, oh, now that your business is better, you got time for me.
And guess what you just instilled to them?
Yeah.
That you're second place, Dad. Now that you want to hang out.
Right. And then why would they want to hang out with you when they can hang out with their friends?
Yeah.
Yeah. And all that stuff for their kids is the foundation. Like, all that programming is done when they're young. You can't do anything. Once they're teenagers, you can't program anymore. It's whatever's in there is in there.
Yeah. You need something real powerful to change those.
Yeah. It's a lot. You can either pay for it now with time, or you can pay for it later on with therapy.
That made me think of another. See, Jim Rohn is just programming in my head, and he said, we all got to suffer from one or two things: the pain of regret, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Like not spending time with your family, yep. Or the pain of discipline, mm-hmm. like time blocking. Right. And then he said, "Here's the thing: success." He said, "Discipline weighs ounces, regret weighs tons."
Exactly.
I was like, wow.
That's It's true. You got to be focused. You got to do it. Otherwise, you can pay for therapy later on.
That's some good conversation. That's off air, though, right?
Yeah. No. We're still going.
Oh, really?
So last thing is,
That's
if someone
cool.
wants to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
Clubhouse. I'm just joking. Yeah, I'm addicted to it, man. But Instagram, House Buying Brian. Shoot me a DM. Actually, in my Instagram, like in my profile, you actually got my phone number. You could text me. I do respond and text back more than DMs, because DMs kind of get lost, and versus the text, it's easier. So Instagram, I'm the most active and the most responsive on Instagram. So
Yeah. And guys, stay up at Clubhouse. So, see you guys later. Thank you guys for watching.
man, thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Oh man, I love that. I was a guest on someone's show, and like, what are your thoughts on Clubhouse? And I just jumped on it. Like, Clubhouse is trash.
That's what everybody did.